The authorship of Ecclesiastes has been debated over time. Originally, it was accepted primarily that Solomon was the author, but since then, it has been widely debated, and nowadays most scholars think Solomon was not the author. So there are two primary viewpoints of when it was written and who is the author, and we're going to look at both a little bit. The first one is Solomon and or possible editors. The reasons are that the Jewish and the Christian tradition holds that Solomon is the author. There's some internal evidence that is used to prove this, and if you look at Ecclesiastes 1, verse 1 and verse 12, it mentions that the author is the son of David, a king in Jerusalem. Ecclesiastes 1:16, 2:15, 12:9 show that the author had great wisdom. He wrote Proverbs, and you also see the reference to Solomon in 1 Kings 3:12 and 1 Kings 4:29 through 34. Also, Ecclesiastes 2 describes great building projects, gold and treasures, and many women. And we see that Solomon had that in 1 Kings 3:1, 13, 9, verse 10 through 28, and 1 Kings 10, verse 22 and verse 14. So if this is so, it was perhaps written around 940 through 931 BC. Most that hold that Solomon was the author believe that it was later on in his life, because of all the things that he had experienced and all the women that had taken him away from God, that perhaps he returned to God at the end of his life, because it seems like the author in chapter 2 has said that he had done all of these great things, tried pleasure, wealth. Nothing brought any meaning in life. So perhaps he had wrote this book at the end of his life after looking back and seeing that really the only thing that exists is the fear of God and obeying God. It is possible because there's the first person, I, is used in Ecclesiastes, except in Ecclesiastes 1:2, 7, verse 27, and the end in chapter 12, verse 9 through 14 is the third person. So perhaps later on there was some editor that added these things about Solomon. The second option is an unknown author. And the reasons are because in the text there are influences of Aramaic, Persian, and Greek. And the form of Hebrew that is in the text indicates a post-exile type of Hebrew. Solomon is referred to in chapters 1 and 2 because of his wisdom, his wealth and possessions, but he is not the author, they claim, because of Ecclesiastes 1:12, where it said, I was king over Israel and Jerusalem. So there's the past tense mentioned here. And Ecclesiastes 1:16, which says, more than all who were over Jerusalem before me. So there were only David was the king before Solomon. So they say that this shows that it is not Solomon. And also the name Solomon does not appear in the book at all. And the use of the third person in chapters 1 and 12, as we mentioned before. So if there's an unknown author, they think that it was dated post-exile, perhaps between 200 or 400. So who is the original reader then? Well, it depends on who you think the author was. If it was Solomon who wrote the book, then the original reader would have lived during the greatest time of Israel's history. It would have been a time of peace and prosperity. Israel was a great nation. They had influence around the nations who were their neighbors. They controlled the major trade routes. There was no war. They had huge amounts of wealth. And Solomon was perhaps looking back in his life and his people, and he saw that they had made the same mistakes that he was making, of seeking after greed and wealth and money and success, when there was only emptiness, only vanity in all of that. And he wanted to show them that these things don't bring meaning in life, but fearing God and following God does. If it's post-exile when it was written, then the author would want to come against the Persian and Greek influences of their lust for money and power and pleasure. And that the author wanted to encourage the original reader to hold on to the Jewish worldview and reject these other worldviews that would take them away from God. So the main idea of Ecclesiastes is that the preacher or the author is searching for the meaning of life. And he concludes that life is vanity, life is meaningless without God. So fear Him and obey Him. And some of the main reasons that the book is written was to emphasize that the meaning of life cannot be found in temporary human things, because they are brief and worthless without God. You know, life without God becomes worthless, meaningless, hopeless, and even insecure. But to understand life, the meaning of life begins with the fear of God. Life can have meaning and enjoyment in God.